Many thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. Perhaps one of the most talked about aspects of photography as a whole is related to composition, and especially when it comes to landscape photography. There's so much information out there on the topic, from podcasts to, articles to videos to entire books that are dedicated to perfecting composition. And I remember when I first became interested in this genre of photography, composition is what I focused on the most. I felt that getting better at composition was the way to improve my photography the most in the quickest possible way. And I still think that's the case today. And I consumed as much content on composition as I possibly could. I listened to everything, I watched everything, and I read everything. And I filled my brain with so much information related to the rule of thirds or leading lines and foreground interest and looking for layers and depth in a photograph, to where when I would actually get on location, I would completely freeze. I didn't even know what to do. I didn't know how to decipher or process all the information rattling between my ears. And I didn't know what techniques to implement when. I was afraid if I implemented this rule, I would break that rule. And I started to realize that the more I researched composition, the worse my composition actually got. And looking back on everything now, out of all the compositional tips and tricks and best practices and techniques, there's really only one piece of advice that really made the single largest impact on my landscape photography. But what's so important about this piece of advice is not solely the advice itself, but why you want to do this that matters the most. And I received this kind of, golden nugget of wisdom maybe 4 or maybe 5 years ago now. And I wasn't told why I should do this. And most importantly, I wasn't told when I should do this. I was simply told, find your focal point and get low. Find your focal point and get low. That was it. I was pretty much left to figure out the rest on my own. And I spent the next, 12 to maybe 18 months trying to figure out exactly how to implement this new advice. And I struggled for many, many months. But over time, I started to realize what situations were best to get low in and why I want to do this. And that's the purpose of this week's video, is to discuss why getting low is the most powerful landscape photography advice I ever received. Now, I broke this down into five parts where each situation or each part represents a particular situation. And as always, I ranked everything. So number one is the number one reason or the number one situation where you want to get low for your landscape photography compositions. So to jump right into it, the number 5 reason is whenever you have interesting textures in your foreground or patterns in your foreground, that is a great situation to get your camera low to it to really show that off. Here's a great example right here where this is kind of the classic texture in a photograph, which is sand. And the sun was rising right over here, casting this nice warm sidelight across the sand, and it was just kind of illuminating every little particle of sand, and it showed off a lot of the structure of the sand, which, it equated to a lot of texture in this actual photograph. And when you zoom into it, you can really see it. And I love this image because you got this area up here where there's really no texture meeting this area of texture. So it's kind of that whole yin and yang. But what's so neat about texture is that if I touch my screen, I can't feel that sand. Or if I print this image, I can't feel that sand in the print. I can feel the print, but I can't feel the sand. So if you're able to accurately portray a particular type of texture in a photograph, that's a very powerful thing. So looking for texture is a great thing or a great situation to be aware of. Here's another example right here where there was a lot of just kind of soft, subtle texture here. So it didn't jump out quite as much as the previous image with the sand, but there was a lot of just subtle green, mossy texture right through here. And it's just enough to kind of grab the viewer's attention and just hold their gaze a little bit longer. And I kind of like how this foreground area right here just kind of points up to this waterfall right there. So it just creates great foreground interest. Here's another example right here where I don't think this is the greatest image. The sky is extremely bland, but I love the texture. We have the setting sun over here. That's just casting this soft bit of sidelight on these rocks. And I think the texture that is shown in these rocks by getting very low was really, really amplified, getting low to this area right here, and it shows off all of the texture and structure in these rocks. And for me, that is hands down the most exciting part of this image right through here. Now, the fourth situation where I think getting low is absolutely fantastic is where you have any type of moving water in your foreground, especially when you get your camera very close to that moving water. And it doesn't have to be an ocean, or it could be a river, it could be a stream or a creek. It doesn't really matter. Any type of a moving water, getting maybe in the water, if it's safe, of course, and getting your camera close to the water is a great way to create that really immersive effect. Here's a good example from a trip to Maui a couple years ago, where the tide was coming in, and as the tide actually passed my camera and then it would start to recede out is when I would take the image. And you just get these really great leading lines that kind of draw the viewer's eye into your photograph. And what I really liked about this one is you have this kind of rock structure right here, and the tide kind of bends around this rock, and it just creates this very interesting kind of U-shaped pattern that leads the eye into the actual image. And with this image as well, I was also able to get a lot of texture. So getting low, I was able to get a great immersive look in this water, a little bit of texture in the water, a little bit of texture in the rock as well. And you'll notice that theme throughout this entire video, where a lot of these situations, you could have one situation where there's multiple reasons to get low or multiple benefits to that. So they all kind of dovetail together a little bit. Here's another good example right here from the Oregon coast, where the tide was coming in. My camera was probably a little bit lower than I generally like. It was less than maybe 6 inches from the actual tide coming in, and as the water retreated out, I would take the exposure, and you just get these this nice kind of leading elements to kind of draw the viewer's eye into the actual photograph. And here's another image from the Oregon coast where the tide was receding past me, pulling back out, and that's when I took my exposure and captured these really cool kind of leading lines that create this kind of triangle effect, which also mimics these sea stacks right here. And of course, the setting sun was perfectly positioned right between it all. But just being able to get that kind of just a really immersive look is by getting low to any type of moving water. Now, the third situation that this is great for is reflection. So whenever you have anything that is reflecting, a portion of your photograph, getting very close to that reflective surface is a great way to really make that reflection pop a little bit more. Here's a great example, and what I really like about this example is this is one of the very first times I was able to really see the benefits of getting close to the reflection. I shot this image, I wish I still had the images, at eye level, which is where I shot a lot of my photographs back then. I shot it at eye level, and the reflection didn't quite naturally resemble what the actual background looked like. But once I got the camera very low to the water, I was able to get this. And this is just such an accurate representation of what the actual background that it's reflecting is. So much, if I actually flip this image around, you really can't even tell what is the reflection versus what is real life. And I think that is what's really cool about reflections in landscape photography. It's a great way to not only simplify a composition, but it creates balance, it creates symmetry. It's a lot of fun to really pay attention to reflections. Here's another one right here from Yosemite Falls. This was actually in last week's video as well. Just by getting very close to the water surface right here, just to get that perfect reflection. And same thing in this situation, when you flip it upside down, it's somewhat kind of difficult to tell what's the reflection and what is not the reflection. And then here's one more image from Moab, Utah, where I had to get my camera very, very close to this little puddle right here, because the only way to get the reflection of the monuments in the background right through here was to get the camera extremely low. And I am within probably 6 inches above this area right through here. And that was the only way I could actually get this reflection in the actual puddle right through here. So paying attention to reflections, whenever you see reflections, that's a great opportunity to get that camera low to really kind of show off that reflective nature of the water. Now, the second situation, this is perhaps one of my most favorite, is to exaggerate whatever is in your foreground. And I mentioned this in a video a couple weeks ago all about creating powerful wide-angle landscape photos. And whenever you're using a wide-angle lens, which is extremely common in landscape photography, the natural distortion of that lens is great for exaggerating whatever is in your foreground. And even if you're not using a wide-angle lens, whenever you get close to anything in your foreground, it is naturally going to make it look bigger in your frame or take up more real estate inside of your photograph. And this image, once again, is a great example of that, because when you first look at this, it looks almost like a pond, but this was just a little tiny rain puddle. It was maybe 1 foot by 1.5 feet. It was just a small little puddle. But by getting my wide angle lens, I think it was opened up to all the way at like 16 millimeters, and getting it extremely close to this puddle, I was able to really show off exactly how big, or make it appear that this puddle was actually larger than it actually is, and which also makes that reflection appear much bigger as well. And here's another great example from Acadia National Park. This is Boulder Beach. And there are some huge boulders on this beach, but these rocks right here, they weren't boulders, but I really liked how they were positioned, and I liked the angle of how I could get that nice sweeping line out to the cliff face in the background, where the rising sun was just kind of softly illuminating this area right through here. But by getting a wide angle lens very close to these rocks, it really made them seem a lot bigger than they actually were. And it really kind of grabs the viewer's attention when you first look at this photograph. This is what you see. And once again, I was also able to pick up a little bit of texture in a lot of these rocks as well, just by getting very, very close to these 4 rocks in the foreground. Here's another example from Moab, Utah. I thought this was really cool. There was just this patch of grass that, honestly, it kind of resembled a patch of grass in somebody's lawn, and it was in the middle of the desert, and I thought it would be a great foreground interest to use. And by getting very close to this tiny patch of grass, it makes it, one, appear much bigger, and I was also able to pick up a lot of texture right through here in the rocks, and I like how it kind of leads the eye up to this area of grass right here. So just getting very close really kind of made that foreground area much more powerful and much more interesting. And then, of course, this image here, I've shown this in a couple of videos over the past month, but this is from a recent trip to Arizona. Was able to get very close to this cactus, showed off a lot of the interesting texture of the cactus, and it also made the cactus appear much larger than it actually was in real life. And for number 1, and perhaps the top reason why I think getting low is such amazing advice, is because it is fantastic for showing depth, for creating separation between layers, because all photographs have an area that's kind of designated for the foreground. You have another area that's designated for your midground, and another area that's designated for your background. But sometimes, especially when you're shooting at maybe eye level or chest level, it's difficult to see the separation between those layers. And then when you have images like that, they lack depth. Here's a good example right here. Once again, not the greatest image, but it's a good representation of separating layers. This is inside the Haleakala volcano in Maui. This is the crater. But by getting close to this little bit of foreground, you're able to get this kind of sweeping foreground that kind of leads out here to the midground, that flows out here to the background where the clouds are kind of moving in. And I shot this image at eye height as well. And you lose the foreground right here. And when you lose that foreground, the midground just kind of blends in with the background, and you just lose that separation. Here's another good example right here. We're getting close to this boardwalk and dropping the camera below the reeds in the water right here created a very obvious foreground area right through here, which leads out here to this midground, which is these bushes right here. And you have the boardwalk here as well. And these bushes kind of lead out to the lighthouse in the background and the little house right here by this tree. And it just creates a lot of depth, and it really just separates a lot of those layers. So just getting low is a great way of creating that separation. And I think this image right here kind of really sums up a lot of this video, because this cactus right here, it wasn't near as big as it looks in this photograph. This cactus was only maybe about the size of a softball. But in this image, it looks like the size of a basketball or maybe a beach ball. So getting close to the wide angle lens really made that foreground a little bit more impactful. And I was also able to show off a lot of the texture in this cactus and a lot of the texture in these rocks right here just by getting close to them. And I was also able to create a lot of depth, or separate the layers. You obviously have a clear midground or a foreground area, a very clear midground area right through here, and of course the mountains in the background. So by getting low in this one particular instance, I was able to create texture. I was able to make the foreground area a little bit more impactful, create a little bit more separation in the foreground, midground, and the background. So getting low in this situation really accomplished multiple different things. And that's really why I think that getting low is such powerful landscape photography, compositional advice. So before I do wrap up this week's video, I do want to say a big thanks again to the sponsor of this week's video, who is Squarespace, who I use for literally all of my website needs. Squarespace provides a dynamic and attractive online platform from which to create your website. You can display your photography using Squarespace's professional portfolio designs and customize the layout and look and feel of your gallery. That way you can make it your own. There's also an online booking and scheduling tool for your photo sessions. That way you can add to your Squarespace website so that clients can easily see your availability and reschedule if needed, which ultimately takes the hassle out of coordinating calendars. You can even grow and engage with your customers with Squarespace email campaign tools, which enables you to create powerful emails that match your website with your products or your blog posts and your logo, just so your messaging is consistent. So if you are looking for a new website or maybe looking to upgrade your current website, go to squarespace.com/Mark Denney for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase. So I do hope you enjoyed this week's video. I absolutely love talking about composition. So if you do have any questions regarding the video, please leave those in the comments section below, and I guarantee I will get back in touch with you. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video. And if you did enjoy it, if you could give it that thumbs up, it definitely helps out the video, helps out the channel, and subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I will see you all next week. Bye.